We're turning a 16mm thread onto this shaft that's been pre-prepared in size. The shaft is being turned to 15.95 to make it smaller than the 16mm hole. Once we've got our cutting tool in place, we need to line it up so that the cutting tool is at 90 degrees to the cut we're going to make on our material. So we have this wee gauge which we can place over against the material. The V that's notched out here is at 60 degrees, and it's also the wee tool we use to sharpen up our thread cutting tool to make sure we've got the tool cut at the right angle. For a metric thread, it's 60 degrees. So we just bring this in and make sure that that's lined up. There we go. We've set up our cutting tool, we've set our speeds and feeds, and we've offset our top slide to 60 degrees, and we've ensured that our cutting tool is at 90 degrees to the surface of our material. What we're going to do now is we're going to run a practice run along there, just getting used to the speed and the starting and stopping of our carriage without breaking our tool. So I'm going to set this running, and I've got the cutting tool set out clear of the large size diameter. So with it running, now with our focus on our thread chaser on the side of our carriage, we can pick a number that we want to start on. Now, because this is just a practice demonstration of starting and stopping our tool, it doesn't matter which one we select. So I've got the 7 coming round, or any number for that case, and I'm just going to engage my carriage on that one. So there we go, we're running through, and as it comes down, we want to be able to stop the lathe cutting tool within the recess at the end of our bar, but before we hit the big bar. So there we go, make your stop, and then just quietly feed your carriage in and ensure that you've stopped within that clear space, and there we can see we have. Once you've practiced that, come out just clear of the bar, come back to your start, and when you come back to the start, it doesn't matter where you start from, as you will always start in the same position provided you use your thread chaser. As I mentioned, it doesn't matter at this stage, so we'll start on the 3. So there we are, we're on the 3, it's running through there, and again we must make sure we stop in that distance because we will hit the end of the bar if we don't. It's coming up there now, and disengage. And again, you can wind that in just to see where you've disengaged. All right. So now we can come back to the start again. And we're now going to use the cross slide to set up the 0 referencing away from our tool. So as we go deeper and cut deeper on our tool, we must bring the tool clear of the material to come back to the start. So we'll just come in and we'll make a very light touch just on that surface. There we go. So I'll set my micro collar to 0. And if I look at the position of my micro collar, we're at about 5 o'clock. So I know one full turn clear is going to take the handle around to 5 o'clock. And that should be enough clearance to bring the tool away and allow us to come back to the start position. So now that I've established that, I can come to a clear position, and I can also set my top slide to 0. My top slide is going to give me my depth of cut. Now I'm in that position, I can come back to my cross slide, and I come in one full turn to 5 o'clock, ensuring that my micro collar is set to 0. We're now ready to make our first cut on the material. And this would always be our start position. So if we have to stop at any time and come back, we'd always stay to this position before we start again. Once in this position, we can bring our first cut up. When we go to make our cut, initially when we cut, we're just going to cut on the very tip of our cutting tool here. But as we go deeper with our cut, it's going to start to cut up this leading edge here, and the further we go in, the harder that cut's going to be. So while we can start with a reasonably heavy cut, in this case I'm going to use a 0.2, as I go deeper, then I need to reduce that depth of cut back so that I don't break the tip off. As we're cutting on a very small point of our tip, we need to look at our depth of cut. So for my first two cuts, I'm going to take possibly two cuts at 0.2 millimeters, and then I'll have to reduce that down. If I don't, you'll see that the swarf is coming off that thick that we run the interference of breaking our tool tip. So once I've done those two, I might take 3 to 5 turns at 0.1 millimeter. And even as I go in deeper with this cut, you'll see that the swarf starts to get quite thick again, and I may need to reduce that back. So my last few cuts may need to be at 0.05 millimeters. And you should be okay to finish it off at that size, and it will also give you a very smooth finish on your thread and allow the nut to go on there quite nicely. To make our first cut, we'll set the machine going. I'll add on the increment of 0.2 that we discussed earlier on. And now I need to pick my number that I'm going to start from. So as it comes round, now we try not to use 1 because the increments between the 1 and the 3 can also be misconstrued as 1. So we're going to pick a number that doesn't look like a 1, in this case 3. So I'll engage 3, and the cutting tool is going along and cutting our first thread. Now watch the swarf on here, you'll see it's a very light cut, and this is why we can do 0.2. And you'll see the next 0.2 is just as good. Coming up to our clearance spot, disengage, 1 full turn out to 5 o'clock, and then we can come back to our start. Back in 1 full turn to 0. And now we're ready to start again and make our second cut. But also at this stage, just on your top slide, write down the number 3 so you don't forget what your start number was. So we set our next increment of 0.2, and this is our last one at 0.2. We engage on 3. And as we go along and we're cutting on the surface of the material, you can see that it's a bit deeper, and we're also a lot more swarf coming off there, a lot thicker swarf. And disengage, out 1 turn to 5 o'clock, back to our 0 position, in 1 turn to 0. Once we've made our first couple of cuts and we're happy with the way it's forming, we can then introduce our coolant, and this will help give us a smoother finish and make it a wee bit easier on our cutting tool as well. So we'll put the coolant on. Just needs a small amount of coolant, doesn't need to be going too fast. Make our next cut. We've done our 2.2 cuts. We now do a 0.1, and we wait for it now to come around to the 3. Just when you engage your carriage, just start the process quietly and just feel it engage within the lead screw. Disengage, out to 5 o'clock, back to the start, into 0, engage, 0.1, engage on 3. See now the swarf's starting to come off a wee bit thicker. Just keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't get too thick. Disengage, out 5 o'clock, back to our start position, back into 0, 0.1, engage on 3. See now that the thread's getting quite thick, or the swarf's getting quite thick coming off here. So this will be my last cut at 0.1. Now do a half a mil, or half a hundredth. You see the swarf is still quite thick, but not as thick as it was before. A bit of smoke coming off there as the friction heats it up. Into my 0, and I'm going to stop here while we have a look at the thread form. At this stage we need to check the depth of our, or a pitch of our thread. So we're going to use a thread gauge, and on my thread gauge it's a 0.2, and if we have a look at our thread gauge we can see that on here the tops of these pitches is quite pointed, and if we look at our thread we can still see there's a little bit of a flat across the top of those. We put our thread gauge in and we see how that looks, and I can just see that there is a wee bit of a gap at the top, so I need to go a little bit deeper. Now the last cut I took was 0.05, and there was a large amount of swarf coming off, and I want to make sure my thread stays in good form, so I'm going to take even less off. So I may go to 0.02 for my next cut. As we can see, even with a 0.02 cut, we've still got fairly heavy swarf. Make one more at 0.02 and then we'll check it against the nut. I'm back into my set position and stop there. Alright, so now we're trying the nut onto the end of our thread to see if it goes on. And there we go. And we're just checking to make sure that when we put it on, screw that on there, that there's not too much play, side play there. That's quite a nice smooth fit on there. There we go.